I'm sitting at my mother's dining room table, the same dining room table that I have sat at most of my life, and I'm having the same feelings that I've had most of my life too. I feel love for my family, I feel an eagerness to connect, and I feel a deep resentment of my mother. Sitting at this dining room table brings me back to our family seders, when we would go around and we would each read a part of the story, and after I would read my part, my mother would say, "Kathy, is that the best you can read? What are they teaching you in school?" Or at a regular dinner, when I would ask what a word meant, and she would say, "Well, go look it up. Don't you have any curiosity?" My relationship with my mother is complicated. I know she's a good mother. She is devoted and involved and passionate, but interactions like this make me feel like maybe she's not a very nice person. And I am really conflicted about my conflict around her, because I know that her motherness should outweigh what I feel about her as a person, but I'm stuck. I remember complaining to my husband once about her and saying, "Look, I know you had an objectively difficult childhood, and this probably sounds really silly to you," to which he replied, No. You can't judge other people's pain. I mean, a stubbed toe hurts even if it's not a broken leg." I appreciated his kindness, but really, how much sympathy can you expect for a stubbed toe? But one day, I discovered something that my mother had done, which justified how I felt about her. I uncovered the crime sitting around with my friends, talking about a This American Life podcast episode called Kid Logic. In it, people are talking about misconceptions they had when they were children. For example, one guy was talking about how he thought the Nielsen ratings, for those of you who remember broadcast television, were gathered by polling only families whose last name was Nielsen. I shared that I used to think when I was a kid that a wading pool was a waiting pool, where you waited until you were big enough to go in the adult pool. And then my friend says, "Oh, I remember when our old sick dog disappeared, and I asked my parents where it had gone, and they said, 'We've taken her to live on a farm.'" He said, "It took me years to realize that meant they'd put her down." So my friends keep exchanging these stories, but my heart drops into my stomach. I'm thinking about my grandfather's pet beagle, Major. Major was an amazing dog. He was a spitfire. He would chase cars, he would roll in the mud, he would jump up on people. I thought he was great. And whenever I visited my grandfather, Major was definitely a highlight of the trip. When my grandfather died, I asked my mom if we could have Major come and live with us. And she said, "Absolutely not. He is too wild a dog. He would never be happy living in a New York City apartment. We've taken him to live on a farm." Up until this moment, talking to my friends, I had imagined my little friend happily frolicking on a farm. But now I realize the truth. My mother is a murderer. As horrible as this realization is, I also feel this wash of vindication. Finally, I have something that justifies my feelings about her as a terrible, terrible person. 5 years go by. I travel 3,000 miles across this country. I move there partly to be away from her. And I see her dutifully a few times a year. I have a daughter of my own. I don't want to model disowning a parent. But I cling to this story. Now I am back at her dining room table with my brother and my sister-in-law, my mother, my daughter, and my husband, Michael. And Michael and I are talking about our new pet dog, Rigoletto. Riggy, I say, is a wonderful dog. He's calm and gentle and easygoing, not a beagle. Now, I'm not sure exactly why I say it. Maybe I'm trying to goad my mother. Maybe I'm trying to connect with her. I understand beagles are difficult dogs. But my mother pops her head up and says, "Well, Why not beagles? Beagles are great dogs. I'm confused. Mom, I say, you hated Grandpa's beagle, Major. She says, oh no, he was an amazing dog. Don't you know that story about him? What story, I say? She says, when your grandfather died, we took Major to live on a farm. I cannot believe she is doubling down on this. But then she says, Major was so devoted to your grandfather that he escaped from the farm and traveled 200 miles back to your grandfather's house like Lassie. The neighbors found him wandering around the house after we'd sold it, and they brought him back to the farm. Again, I feel the earth shift beneath my feet. My mother isn't a murderer after all. She didn't take Major to live on a farm. She took him to live on a farm. I can't tell you that my relationship with my mother was perfect after that. It was not. She still annoyed me by yelling at waiters if the service took longer than 3 minutes, or by forcing my daughter to go to the movies even though she said she was scared, or by telling me that I needed therapy because my house was too messy. But it was the beginning of a softening in me, of an opening to some other version of my mom. A few years later, when I got to spend her last few weeks with her in the hospital, I know that we both benefited from my capacity to see her as warm and generous and vulnerable. I am very glad that my mother did not get away with murder. And I'm very glad that I didn't get away with thinking that she had. Thank you.